Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome our guest speaker, Wallace Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, Arnie. As usual, always nice to be with you. I hope that I can function today because when your brain is trying to function when it's 30 below degrees below zero, I'm not sure it's always the best.
No worries. That's pretty impressive, actually. They do things in big ways in Canada, that's for sure. No
Well,
worries.
that's we've had an unusually cold snap and it's still persisting and probably
Mm,
will for a few more days.
mm. Is the cold getting all the way down? I understood it was getting down to the southern states in America. Is it still doing that?
Well, in the east, yes, a week or two ago, it actually did go into the 50, just below 50
Mm,
degrees below zero.
mm,
And that's very dangerous, of course. But
mm,
I would hear it's been about in the 20 to 30, but with wind chill going into the 40s.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I spent a little bit of time in the high country and a couple of times it blew, but I never went, certainly never went out anywhere near that country in a blizzard. And and I imagine the blizzard might be getting to the -10 factor or something like that, but -30, it's a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the west, it's drier and you don't feel the cold like you do in the east. In the east, it's more damp and you feel the cold. It just goes through your bones.
Hmm.
They have had a lot of, I think they've had quite a bit of snow down there this year, whereas in Western Canada, we haven't really had that large volume of snow.
Hmm.
But we're certainly getting a cold snap right now.
Mm, that's incredible, the phenomena of what goes on different parts of the world. No
Hmm.
worries. Thanks for that, Wallace. Now, just to highlight the title of today's forum, it's the history of the social credit movement, and we had touched on that previously. We spoke about people and their thinking based on the fact that there was a significant amount of thinking in regard to philosophy and the different types of philosophies, if you like, dialectical materialism being one,
Hmm.
Christianity being another, and also in regard to how philosophy can actually affect the outcome, the outworking, if you like, say, the dogma of a particular philosophy that is such it permeates the thinking so deeply that you can't actually break out to even reconsider other options. I find that fascinating. I read several books in the last few weeks of Edward Bernays in regard to crystallizing public opinion, and of course Pavlov made mention in that in regard to manipulating dogs. But as I understood, there was also experiments done with humans
Hmm.
to manipulate thinking, and so when you come down to it, the social credit movement was actually in a fertile time for thinking because the ramifications of the 20th century were being laid out in front of a lot of people, and they could see it 100 years before it was actually coming to fruition. And that's the seedbed of which the social credit movement grew up. So Wallace, you've got the
Well,
floor.
that's yes. Certainly, it was a time back in the the early part of the last century when it was a very it was quite ideological with a lot of intellectuals, but it basically the usual pattern was some form of socialism, whether it be guild socialism or Marxist socialism or and so on, and you had the distributists and so on. But Douglas came around with a very different approach to the problem because socialism tends to involve collectivist activity, and collectivist activity tends to submerge the individual.
Hmm.
Douglas placed a very high importance on the individual from the standpoint of him being important in himself or herself, and also because it is really in the individual that all creativity originates.
Hmm.
And if you put the individual into a structure which inhibits the individual, then obviously you are doing damage to the creativity that might emerge from individual action. Douglas said he, his was a study of association, how to maximize the positive results that you could get from association, from human association. But the type of association that he envisaged was free association, where you had the right to join in association or to separate from association,
Hmm.
depending on the results that you're getting. Whereas you get into a type of association that is, I guess, say, frozen or set, you don't have that option.
Mm.
And your creativity, therefore, just doesn't come into fruition,
Mm.
except through conferring with other people. But I think Douglas being involved in very practical activities, in this case, large scale activities, engineering projects, and so on, he understood that you don't solve problems by having a democratic conflab over something. You have to have people who know what they're doing,
Hmm.
who are expert, confident, and capable of going ahead.
Hmm.
Whereas the results flowing from associations or are what people should really judge the association on. In other words, if the association generates good results, then they should be rewarded for that. But we should have a mechanism always to penalize an association or the individuals that are leading it
Hmm.
by simply refusing to accept their offering, their product.
Yeah. Yep. No, I
But if,
appreciate that. I
but if,
my life experiences in industry, and I was in oil and gas for 35 years, and you would think that they were tight as a drum on so many things, and in a lot of ways they are, in order to keep things in the pipes and keep it running smoothly and safely.
mhm,
But my experience was that the structure within the company, and I worked for, I'll name them, I worked for Mobil Oil Australia,
mhm,
and for 24 and a half years, they were a benevolent company. And they actually encouraged me. They limited my enthusiasm, but only through guidance. But they encouraged me to be creative, to be innovative,
mhm,
and to think outside the square. And it was on the basis of that, if you like, that opportunity for individual initiative, I found enormous job satisfaction because I
mhm,
could I could go after difficult issues, and given the encouragement of my managers, um, go after them. And if I found a solution presented on the table, and it was considered, and the merit of it was considered
mhm.
based on nothing more than the realistic feasibility. Is it a realistic consideration? Is this man onto something? So I found that enormously rewarding.
Yes, I'm sure you would. And you obviously worked for a company that had, at that time at least, that they had a somewhat of a realistic approach to the
Hmm.
nature of human association.
Hmm.
And it's fortunate that that was the case, but it certainly isn't always the case because many organizations become quite set in their structure and they
Hmm.
don't allow for a lot of, in other words, you do what you're told, and if you don't, you're gone.
Hmm. Hmm.
In this case, it would appear, even in this case, that the company would, you were a troubleshooter, right? In a sense.
In a sense, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Mm.
And they took your advice on certain things,
Hmm.
but they didn't get together as a group of shareholders and debate the merit of your proposals.
No.
They didn't have a big gathering of everybody who worked for the company to debate the merit. The responsibility lay with certain people in management, and ultimately they said, "This is good or this is bad. We will
Hmm.
accept it. We won't."
Hmm.
And they make the decision. And
Hmm.
having made the decision, they should hold the responsibility for the decision that is made.
Hmm.
There is no responsibility in a big democratic event.
Hmm. No, I
If you don't
appreciate that.
have,
I appreciate that because I can see where it goes, that the objective of an oil company is to produce oil or gasoline, whatever,
mhm,
and that objective, in a sense, running the industry, has to be managed and monitored and assessed on a minute by minute, day by day basis.
mhm,
And so, in the end, of course, you've got to hold an individual, be it the manager, general manager. you've got to hold them accountable for it. So I appreciate that.
Mm,
But when we talk about the actual relationship in society of community of things like that, we really have a hybrid in a sense, a different model that can only work on part of it, be it the administration, but policy itself, as I understand it, comes from the initiatives of individuals working together and coming to agreement.
that's right. And if they don't like the results, they find some other form of association or some other group to associate with.
Hmm.
And that's the way it works in a free society. But in a society where it's a planned society or in a planned economy, you don't have that option because everything is planned from the top down,
Mm,
and you conform. And
mm,
if you don't conform, you're penalized.
mm. That's interesting because that to me illustrates in my mind that you've got two different structures. One for industry, which does need if you like,
Mm-hmm.
a pyramidal type of structure, dominance hierarchy, if you like,
Right.
and whereas society pursues policy, and that is the well-being or the agreement that we want this or we want that, and then it's up to administration to bring that about. So it really is a different arrangement.
Yes, it is. They're two different objectives. One of the objective is to satisfy the consumer, the recipient of the results,
Hmm.
and the other is to make sure that the actual process or the results are formed in a competent manner.
Mm,
And that is what you see. Douglas has been usually by socialist elements and sometimes conservative elements of being a fascist.
mm,
Well, if you look at his book, Social Credit, one of the very things that he complains about is the type of centralized type of social credit,
hmm,
um, is the type of statist administration that was developing in Germany and Italy.
hmm,
He was quite critical of fascism
mm,
because fascism is a sense, it's a socialistic approach in many ways. I mean, there's subtle differences, but there's no doubt about it that it's a centralized type of system where initiatives flow down from the top.
mm,
And Douglas was very critical about that.
hmm,
But you see, his study of association, the principles of association, brought a resolution to this problem because he was able to place responsibility where it belonged, make it responsible, but give the power to consumers to make the choices upon which the administration of industry depends.
hmm.
Because if the consumers do not, if they reject what's flowing from the production line, they are in effect, uh, well, probably throwing the managers into the leisured class.
That's right. Exactly right.
Because,
Yeah.
in other words, there's some people who shouldn't be
Mm, hmm,
in industry because they are not qualified in terms of bringing results
hmm,
to society in general.
mm,
And so Douglas had a very different approach to this. He resolved the problem of centralized power. Now, as you know, A.R. Raj with the New Age was so instrumental in publicizing Douglas's ideas.
yeah.
And Raj had been involved with the Fabian Socialists. He'd been very much involved with the Guild Socialists. And in fact, he wrote an article. I think he titled it an editor's progress, I think it was. And he actually said after meeting Douglas that he had wasted 20 years of his life
Hmm.
with the Guild Socialist movement
Hmm.
because it had certain tendencies toward the centralization of power that it didn't seem to have an answer for
Mm,
or a concern for.
hmm.
And
Mm,
so, but Raj was always very, very inquisitive, and he was always very concerned about this business
mm,
of centralization of power. And that is why he always, although he was supporting these things, it was sort of a forum for the intellectuals of the day. It
mm,
was a very well known, one of the major, if not the major, British intellectual journals.
hmm.
And he brought people from different quarters in order to express their views and so on. So it was quite a ferment of ideas. But he always had reservations. But when he met Douglas, and considered Douglas's position, he became a lifelong uh, devotee or
mm,
supporter of social credit, and he went to try and support it or spread it in the United States of America. And then he returned to Britain to as the editor of the not the New Age but the New English Weekly,
mhm,
and and he gave an address on social credit over the BBC, and that night he died. And that was the end of his career. So the New English Weekly, under his editorship, did not last very long, but it did carry on for quite a number of years, I think into the 40s.
mhm,
And because this was in 34, I think, that he initiated it.
mhm.
This is part of the history of the movement.
I keep on having a recurring thought while I'm listening to you, Wallace, and I know it's out on left field, but to me it's most important. The thought is pressing, so it has to be tabled, and that is that the current green movement, if you like, the current green movement. Now they're advocating handing absolute power to world government and things like that,
Yes.
and essentially putting people into high rise whatever and opening up vast tracts of land because the environment is suffering so badly. So it really orientates towards the religion. In fact, I would say it's a bona fide religion with a certain dogma, etc. But where I'm coming from on this, and I think there is some validity in some of the things they say, and to me the most apparent validity is in the wasted resources of the earth, and in particular, the, in my view, designed obsolescence, where we don't actually manufacture something to last, but rather we're cornered because we've got to keep producing, producing, producing to
Mm.
satisfy the price system. But if we produced an article designed for longevity, then we'd only need to produce it once. And so we could actually take our foot right off the throttle of exploitation of the Earth's resources just simply by designing that in. And of course, the failure is designed so that the manufacturer continues to produce. And this to me is this whole dilemma of why philosophy is so important and why the money system needs to come under the microscope in order for us
It's a
to,
question. Yeah.
yeah, go on.
It's a question. Balance is a very, very big, a very important word in the social credit scheme of things.
Mm-hmm,
Balance. And Douglas, in his very, very, going right back to 1918, when he published the article, The Delusion of Superproduction,
mm-hmm,
he predicted that we would have to go on producing and producing in a crescendo of production merely to carry on. And he said that it would probably portend some very lurid events in the history of human beings.
mm-hmm,
Well, the Second World War and the continuing wars and so on, it's just been very lurid indeed, a
mm-hmm,
total disaster and a tragedy.
mm-hmm,
And it can't get better under the present system. But so there's a tendency for the Greens to be yeah, they do, but it's a pseudo sort of thing because it sacrifices human freedom in the process.
mm-hmm,
They're quite authoritarian and very often.
mm-hmm,
They're saying people have to learn. They have to learn.
mm,
They don't say we have something to propose here, which people might consider so much. They are authoritarian,
mm,
and I know that one of their chief exponents in Britain wrote an absolutely, I would say, devastating, and I would say scurrilous article about social credit.
mm,
Absolute virulent. And I think that it's that subconscious realization that social credit stands for the freedom of the responsible individual.
mm-hmm,
You see, they don't trust freedom.
mm,
They don't trust human beings.
mm-hmm,
In fact, sometimes you get the impression they don't like human beings
mm.
and that they would like to suppress human life on the earth.
Well,
It's almost as though they regard us as some kind of an excrescence on the landscape, as though
mm,
human beings are fundamentally irresponsible and incapable of leading responsible lives.
mm,
And if that's the case, there isn't much meaning to life.
mm. I found it fascinating. I think a comment attributed to Jordan Peterson, and that
Hmm.
is through his 12 rules for life, and he's encouraging, I think, through his writing to the young male to accept responsibility, and it's from responsibility that the young male will have find meaning in his life by
Hmm.
accepting responsibility. And so I look on it and I think, well, you go out and if you had humanity left alone, what would you do? Well, I know what I'm doing, and it's to do with the earth. It's to do with growing. It's to do with nurturing. I mean, I had to break our discussion to go and protect some chickens that are outside because they're too young to deal with the inclement weather,
Hmm.
and to me, it's that minute by minute engagement that that really does orientate me into my relationship with the world. And you can't do that. I don't believe you can do that. You can't actually even engage with the world meaningfully if you're in a high-rise building with an 8 by 8 by 8 room and you're given one or two rooms and that's what your family has to survive in. I mean, that's the design parameters of the, what did they call it? Stalinist Baroque. Stalinist Baroque all through Eastern Europe. When I travelled through there, that was what
Oh
you
yes.
saw. That the people were no more than human chickens in their coop, and to me it was just an abysmal way to treat someone when given the opportunity, a little bit of land, a little bit of creativity, the option, the ability to be
Hmm.
creative, and you look at it in some of the suburbs in some of the small farms in Victoria, some of the suburbs in our cities, they're absolutely beautiful. The gardens are landscaped. They're
Hmm.
prolific in life, in growth, in animal husbandry. I mean, we've got the stage now where it's interesting watching the birds that will nest in our trees. We really
Hmm.
do live in a forest, and the fact is,
Hmm.
it's just we're in negotiation with the birds as to how much fruit they can have and how much we won't let them have on our trees. It's fascinating that that opportunity, and that's only through freedom that's allowed us in this home to do that. Only through freedom, that going after it, getting our own land, building our own home, establishing our own forests, our own gardens, our own orchards, and bringing in the animals to suit.
You see, that's the difference between one attitude toward life, one philosophy of life. As Douglas said, society is metaphysical.
Hmm.
We we shape our institutions according to some kind of philosophical basis.
Hmm.
People, when they have control of their own environment, are encouraged because they know that they can have an effect.
Hmm.
But if you're part of some great, gigantic organization, you know that you do not have control of things. Somebody at the top has control. You cannot actuate your creativity, your love for your surroundings, or whatever. You can't do that because
Hmm.
you're not allowed to.
Hmm.
But some people have the idea that yes, human beings are essentially endowed more with frailty than they are with virtue, and that human beings must be controlled. I was at a meeting here a while ago, a little political meeting sponsored by my member of parliament, and this one fellow said they have to learn,
Hmm.
and I said, well, I've always been reluctant to advise other people as to how they should conduct their life. I'm inclined to feel that maybe they were a better expert on that than I am. I have enough challenges facing my own,
Hmm.
the decisions I have to make in my own life.
Hmm.
And he literally shut up.
Hmm.
But I could just see that it was authoritarian mood or attitude that was just immediately bursting out.
Hmm.
But he didn't say another thing for most of the meeting.
Mm. Because I think you challenged the point, and I think that's the issue with the, if you like, the rabid environmentalists, um, that their point of view is at a point. I mean, this lady and the Democrats in America, they want to shut
Mm-hmm.
down all industry, shut down
Yeah.
airports, shut down this, shut down that, and it's the fact is that this particular individual, have they stopped using planes? Have they stopped using makeup? Have they turned power off to their home? Do they use a push bike to get to and from? It's all humbug. It's for someone else. It's they want
Yes,
to impose a set of rules onto someone else,
someone else.
and to me
Yes,
it's a type of pathology. We've watched this outwork the last 100 years. We've watched this same type of tyrant surface every so often. And I think I mentioned it yesterday. If there's one critique I have for Venezuela and Chavez, it was that he didn't trust his people enough to actually let them feed themselves. That should have been the first thing that he did. Once he was in a position of saying, okay, we can do this, do that. Well, my people need to feed themselves. I think that's just so important because that gave them their own security.
that's right. And you tend, I think most people, given a natural environment, tend to be creative. They tend to be sometimes very creative.
Mm,
And if they have freedom to go ahead and achieve, but it's feedback. If you don't get rewards from your efforts, you're going to tend to start to pull your efforts backwards
hmm
and restrain them. And
mm,
that there's nothing in that that is going to turn out well because things just aren't going to happen
mm,
unless you feel that the end of humanity is the proper conclusion of this experience on life
mm,
on Earth. But it's no, and it's a lot of us to do with fear because and this again gets back to the financial system,
hmm
where the real problem is because the financial system literally sabotages the nature of human association
mm,
because it suppresses us. It creates insecurities, and when you're insecure, you tend to pull back and just sort of paralyze.
hmm
Except for the occasional person who is very resilient and very determined who will try and fight it. And
hmm
sometimes they break through.
mm.
But in general, it's a very, very bad thing because it tends to make people compliant and just uh, more or less non creative.
Mm,
And this is the problem with the socialist movement from day one.
mm,
And so people, you see, some people are concerned about Douglas's statement that yes, you have to have a pyramidal organization in a specific productive
mm,
operation.
mhm,
Yes.
mhm,
So they immediately say, oh, he's a fascist.
mm,
But they
mm,
totally ignore or fail to understand the means that he provided to distribute power to individual
mm,
citizens through
mhm.
a dispersion of purchasing power,
That's
which
right.
would
Yeah.
allow them to make claims without obligating their future.
Mm,
And so you see today, yes, we get loans from the banks, but that is so that more production can take place. But the policy of production is largely controlled by those who issue the credit.
mm.
And so that if we had the ability to absorb as a society what we're producing at all times, that whole element of external control would be removed from
That's
human
right.
society and
And,
human
and
association.
and we would respond to the designed obsolescence phenomena, which is completely unnecessary. And
It is.
components, articles within the productive process would be designed once and for all for longevity, so that your particular model phone could last for 10 or 15 years without a problem. Your car, if you had a pre-lube system that primed your lubricating system before your engine could even
Mhm.
engage, starter motor engage, that may double or triple the life of the engine. And
Mhm.
and these are the type of things that are not so onerous as to be included within the design
Yeah.
parameters. I think it's just
You
most
see,
important. Yeah.
I've mentioned this before. I do believe that there is a basis for, I mean, we progress in our understanding and our quality of doing things, hopefully, as we learn,
hmm
and we can do things to make things more efficient. And I think that it's not desirable to retain old things if they're not efficient. If it's going to take you 10 times as long to get from point A to B with the
hmm
old device, I think it's better to have a new device that'll get you there faster.
hmm
But that is functional. That is a genuine functional improvement.
mm,
This other thing that we're caught in today is we're forced to produce and just to produce and produce more and more all the time.
mm,
And of course, that tends to actually work against quality because you're talking in quantitative terms rather than necessarily in qualitative terms.
mm.
It's a matter of distributing incomes, and the more the better because somehow you have to absorb this product that's coming off the production line,
Mm.
and
That's
that's every producer depends on it, and industry can't function unless it sells, so it can recover its costs of production.
that's right. That's exactly right. I think that's a very good half hour we've had, Wallace, and I really
Oh,
appreciate the your input and presenting the history of the social credit movement, but also the while we're in the midst of this history, we're also discussing the philosophy and the ramifications of policy. And so it becomes to me, it's you can't touch one part of it without actually looking at more deeply in other parts. And I think that this is going to go on for a long time. These interviews, Wallace Klinck.
and certainly we shouldn't fall for the argument that fulfillment or that desirable things can only happen when they're under a high level of centralized control. You can have freedom and you can have a good life, a rewarding life, and an abundant life. You don't have to have everything directed by the cognoscenti or all knowing ones who think that they are qualified to govern every aspect of human life.
Well done. Thank you for that, Wallace. Excellent summary. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Luks and Wallace Klinck at the Freedom Forum. Cheers.